All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another in a series of Lunch and Learns. This legislative briefing, Lunch and Learn, is the first in a series presented by Alaska Outdoor Alliance, kind of really focused on our legislators and staff, although certainly open to the public as always. Alaska Outdoor Alliance is the voice of Alaska's $2.2 billion outdoor recreation economy. The U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis data shows that Alaska is the 7th largest outdoor recreation economy in the United States and accounts for nearly 4% of state economic output. Our stakeholders represent summer and winter sports, motorized and non-motorized hunting and fishing, makers, sellers, educators, professional services, public health care workers, and transportation planners, and a whole assortment of folks that touch our industry. This is our 4th year of educating legislators about the value of the sector to our economy, the health of our residents, and the underlying driver of our tourism economy. In today's session, we are making the case that outdoor recreation infrastructure is critical infrastructure. Alaska has the highest percent of outdoor participation in the country. 81% of Alaskans report that they recreate outdoors. New data measuring changes in use and attitudes about parks and trails during the pandemic bear witness that outdoor recreation and access to it is not just a nice to have, but a need to have. Today, you'll hear 4 perspectives that illustrate these points. Joelle Hall is president of the Alaska AFL-CIO and chair of Anchorage Park Foundation, and she'll be describing how those 2 worlds intersect and make our case. George Schaaf is director of City and Borough of Juneau, and he'll explain how and why Juneau became the first city in Alaska to allocate CARES Act funding to get people back to work during the pandemic. And Leah Boltz with Bettisworth-North Architects and Planning will share her perspective on outdoor infrastructure from her professional perspective, as well as that of being a mom. And finally, we hope that James King is here. We were a little worried about him, but we'll also have James King from the U.S. Forest Service, and he'll be talking to us about some changes in direction from the U.S. Forest Service perspective. And as one of the bigger landholders in Alaska, that's certainly something we want to keep track of. So I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation by letting Joelle take the stage and take it from here.
Well, thank you, Lee. Good afternoon, everybody. Like Lee said, my name is Joelle Hall. I'm the president of the Alaska AFL-CIO. Additionally, I've had the pleasure of serving on the Anchorage Park Foundation for the last 6 or 7 years, and most recently as the chair of the organization. The Alaska AFL-CIO, of course, supports the development of critical infrastructure. That's our job. It's what we do. And we are proud and eager to support a general obligation bond should it go to the voters in 2022. And we are very glad that the Long Trail in particular is on the bond this year. We look forward to building everything on that bond, but additionally, we'd really like to work on the Long Trail. The intersection of my hobby as the Parks Foundation chair, as well as an advocate for trails, parks and trails, and the leader of Alaska's labor movement it's a beautiful intersection for this conversation today. The Long Trail will extend from the north into the south, from kind of viewing Anchorage's existing fabulous trail system as like the center knot from which to build far north and far south, so that we can have a worldwide tourist destination trail system to attract visitors and to help build that economic environment that Lee was talking about. In the Anchorage Park Foundation, we've done consistent polling that shows that Anchorage citizens spend a significant amount of money associated with their trail use, whether it's they're riding a bike on it or walking their dog with it. We all know that trails are not just critical infrastructure, they're economic infrastructure, and that we do well when we invest in parks and trails because they do bring our citizens out to play and tourists to our communities. The Long Trail would be no exception. We're very supportive and super eager to support the bond that would be on. The Anchorage Park Foundation also would encourage, and the Alaska AFL-CIO would encourage the expansion of Anchorage's model of inclusive play. And by inclusive play, what we mean is play that's available for everybody of all abilities. You may or may not be aware, Anchorage, Alaska is the world leader in inclusive play, having more inclusive playgrounds than any community on the face of the earth. We're very proud of that work. We are confident that Alaska, with support of bonds like this and the federal government with infrastructure developments, that we could take that amazing jewel that we have and expand it to any other community in Alaska. We do this through the intersection of a public-private partnership of the Anchorage Park Foundation and federal funders like the Fish and Wildlife Service, the state of Alaska, and the municipality of Anchorage. This nonprofit government partnership is the key to building the long trail. It's the key to building more inclusive infrastructure. And the Anchorage Park Foundation, as well as the Alaska AFL-CIO, is very supportive of the long trail and that expansion of those high quality assets all over our state. Happy to answer any questions, but couldn't be happier to be supporting the bond. Thanks.
All right. We have, we're going a little bit, the next speaker we'll bring to this presentation is James King, who is, he's joining us by phone. He is the director for Region 10, the Alaska region of the Forest Service, for their Recreation Lands and Minerals division. And he's going to share with us a little bit about how the Forest Service nationally, as well as in Alaska, is thinking about recreation these days. So James, you can unmute yourself and go ahead and take the stage.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just great.
Oh, good. Sorry, I can't do my camera, but I'm not very pretty, so it doesn't matter, I guess. So as Lee said, I work for the Forest Service. I'm the Regional Director of Recreation, Lands, and Minerals, and I'm based in Juneau. And as she said, this is an exciting time. Things are changing, and especially as we're thinking about recreation and the importance of recreation. There's a greater recognition of the benefits, health benefits that come from recreation, and particularly there's also this incredible recognition now of the economic benefits of recreation, with 2.2% of the gross domestic product being outdoor recreation. So the other thing that's interesting with COVID, outdoor recreation has shot up in the Forest Service across the country. And people often describe it that the big weekend for outdoor recreation used to be the 4th of July, and every campground was full, every trailhead was over full, and people parked down the roads, and everything was beyond capacity. This last year, every weekend has been like the 4th of July weekend. The use has gone up tremendously. And that's interesting to think about. Have we created a new group of people that are interested in outdoor recreation? And is that going to stick as we move into the future? That really makes us think a lot about how do we move into the future? And there's some exciting things that have happened. The Great America Outdoors Act, as many of you have heard about that, fixing up national parks and the forests. That's pretty exciting to see that recognition of the importance of fixing up some of our deferred maintenance and improvements that are really desperately needed. It's an interesting time in this administration. Certainly they look at things differently than the past administration, and recreation is one of those things that they're looking at. And so at a national level, I'm one of 9 recreation directors across the country. There are 9 regions within the Forest Service. And as we've been meeting with leadership in our Washington office, they have challenged us to rethink the delivery of recreation. And so what does that really mean? Well, As we're wrestling with that, again, looking at the trends that are happening, demand is going up, and we struggle as an agency to keep up with that demand. We also struggle sometimes to remain relevant. We've got lots of wonderful infrastructure, and lots of it's older, and it doesn't necessarily meet the needs and the demands of the current generation. As we look at the boom in interests of mountain biking and e-bikes, and mountain climbing is spiking right now, and motorized uses are spiking. And so as we take on this challenge of rethinking the delivery of recreation, we're really taking a hard look at these things and saying, gosh, we've really got to right size our infrastructure. In the past, we've often looked at our infrastructure and said, gosh, we got too much. We can't, our budgets have gone down. We can't afford to manage everything. We need to figure out how to get rid of things. Well, we finally come to the realization, many of us have, that that simply doesn't work. The demand is going up. We have to figure out how to meet that demand. And that doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of things. It may mean shifting some, that we may have old tired infrastructure that's no longer being used much, and we need to shift that to an area where there's a greater demand, such as towards mountain biking or some other uh, uh, piece of the outdoor recreation uh, industry and interests of the public. So one of the things that's important as we think about that is working with our partners and other agencies. We've come to the recognition we don't have to do everything by ourselves. We need to work with the other agencies, with local and state agencies, with partners, with nonprofits, and collectively come together to create the whole of the need for outdoor recreation. That means, again, that we don't have to provide everything. We need to focus on those things that we're good at providing, and let others focus on things that they're good at. So again, as we rethink this at a national level, this involves really strengthening our partnerships with other agencies, with nonprofits, with tribes, with private industry, with concessionaires, all of the different tools that are out there. And certainly communication is a huge piece of that. And I think I would end that thought with the other thing sometimes we struggle with is telling our story, helping people understand what a huge demand there is for outdoor recreation. And we need to do a better job of sharing that story with people, and the benefits, health benefits, economic benefits, and just the joy uh, of being able to get out and do things. So what does that mean at a regional level? Well, one of the things we're diving into right now is a regional recreation plan to really take a hard look at what it does mean. And it does mean working at the local level to understand the needs and the demands. One of the great things that's going on here in Juneau is the city is doing a comprehensive trails plan update, and they're ignoring property lines. They're simply saying, in our community, what are the most important trails to fix up? What are new ones that we need? And we're watching very, very closely with that. That's what's going to tell us what we need to do. And we need to work harder at those types of combined planning efforts. To that end, on the Tongass, there's an effort from Alaska Trails, which is one of our partners, which is doing similar planning processes in some of the other communities across Southeast. So again, partnerships are huge. Working with the local communities to determine what their needs and demands are. Adjusting the infrastructure that we have now to meet the needs and demands of those that are coming along. An example of that here in Juneau again would be at the Mendenhall Glacier. When the cruise ships come, we simply can't accommodate all the people that want to come. And we're going through a big planning process. We're in the middle of an EIS right now to improve that infrastructure so that we can provide those opportunities for outdoor recreation. And there's several other examples of that where we're starting to think about cabins, and do we have the right mix of cabins? And mountain biking trails is one I've brought up several times. Are we really meeting the demand there? Partners, again, at a local level are very important. Working with the nonprofit trail organizations and aquatic species passage organizations that are into or really focused on those types of projects. We work closely with the National Forest Foundation, others to meet those needs. Special uses, getting permits is always a process in our agency, and we know that. We're working hard to simplify that, to put the process online, to make it so that outfitter guides can look online and see where people are using facilities or where they're going so that they can spread themselves out and see where opportunities really exist. Business partners are also important, and we're looking at that and working with them. Thinking a little bit about the tribes and tourism, that's important to us as well. We just, in the last few months, created a 3-year partnership with Tlingit and Haida here in Southeast Alaska to further, again, thinking about how we interact with communities, how we affect them economically, how we can provide jobs, how we can look at outdoor recreation and meet the needs and the demands of the public and the businesses. One of the exciting things that just happened in the last few weeks, back in 2016, there was an act called the National Native Act. And one of the pieces of that was to try and help Native communities increase tourism to build economies. And so this year, for the first time, the Forest Service put $1 million towards that effort at a nationwide level. And we worked hard with many of our partners, not all of them, but as many as we could reach out to as quickly as we could. It was a very short turnaround. And we ended up in Alaska with $250,000 of the $1 million. When you think about dividing $1 million by 9 regions, Alaska came out on top, and it's not very often that we come out on top. So that's exciting. And those are projects that the various Native organizations are going to do to further tourism, further the interest in people wanting to come and see what they do. We're also talking a lot about how do we do more in local training and hiring local crews to build and maintain trails and campgrounds and those sorts of things. Building the economy is certainly important with this. So I'm going to leave it there unless there's questions for me.
All right. Well, James, thanks for taking time out of the other personal things that are affecting you right now. And if we have some questions, we'll field those to you afterward, because I'd like to be able to have you get back to those things that demand your immediate attention. And then it makes sense to me that you provided a great transition for us to talk to George Schaaf from Juneau, since you mentioned a number of projects that are in Southeast and in the work that the comprehensive trail planning that they're doing in Juneau. And And so, George, I will turn over the stage to you.
Thanks, Lee, and thank you for having me here today. I think James set the great stage at the very high level, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how that translates locally. So I want to talk a little bit about how economic stimulus programs right now can have a real impact on communities, and how we in Juneau used CARES funding to get people to work this past summer through our COVID Conservation Corps program. So I'm just going to share my screen. I don't have a bunch of slides. I do have some photos though. Because I just like taking photos, and I'm really proud of some of the work that got done this year. So real quick, the COVID Conservation Corps in Juneau was a partnership, public-private partnership between the city and borough of Juneau, the city-owned ski area at Eagle Crest, and Trail Mix, which is our local trails nonprofit that employs trails crew each year. And the idea for the CCC really came from our former mayor, Bruce Patello, who was tasked by our current mayor, Beth Weldon, to chair an economic stabilization task force last spring to deal with the economic impacts of COVID-19, lockdown, and also to talk about how best to allocate CARES funding. The city and borough received $53 million in CARES funding last spring, and they've used it for a variety of different projects here in the community. And one of those was the CCC. So early on, the task force recognized that one of Juneau's legs of our three-legged stool of our economy really got knocked out. So we look at government as being one leg, natural resources, fishing and mining to be another leg, and then recreation and tourism being the third. And with the cruise ship season totally wiped out last year, probably again this year, a third of our economy was really on the rocks. So we know it was a tough year all over the world and all over Alaska. Alaska's unemployment rate, as you all know, went up 600% last year. Here in Juneau, it went up 800%, largely because of the loss of the tourism industry. So by the time the CDC announced a no-sail order for cruise ships in March, a lot of the employees of our seasonal tourism industry were already on the way here. There are about 2,800 seasonal workers that come to Juneau each summer. And a lot of them were on their way here. I was a seasonal worker about 20 years ago. That's how I ended up here working for the Forest Service. And I know when I moved here to take that job, I rolled into town with barely enough money to pay for gas to get through Canada. So I think a lot of the folks who arrived here expecting to work for the summer were in a similar position, and were really wondering what they were going to do. So the Assembly here in Juneau appropriated $1 million in CARES funding to establish this program. And in about 2 weeks, we created a program from scratch that was aimed at providing an employment training program for furloughed, unemployed, or underemployed people in the community. Other goals were to prevent eviction and homelessness, prevent insolvency of the unemployment fund, and to provide emergency financial assistance to people impacted by COVID-19. To do that, we looked to the federal government, to the U.S. Department of Labor's Job Corps program. And that's a national program that has provided workforce development since the Johnson administration. And we took their 800-page program manual and distilled it down to 3 pages to really focus on job skills training, improvements to public lands, and economic relief for the community. So I'm just going to scroll through a few photos here. The program overall employed over 60 people here in town. We ended up spending all but $60,000 of the $1 million appropriated by the Assembly. All of the purchases of materials went to local vendors here in Juneau or in Southeast Alaska. And it was really moving to talk to some of the folks who participated on these crews who last year, or the year before, would have been guiding dog sled tours on the Juneau ice field, or giving bus tours out to the Mendenhall Glacier. And now they were working in parks and on trails. And they were so grateful for the work, so appreciative to be able to stay in Juneau. And it was just a really incredible experience for not only them, but also I think for our staff too. We really tried to look at this from the historical lens of the CCC in the 30s. And we really focused on improvements to public lands, trails, and outdoor recreation facilities. The CCC crew built a bike pump course here in Juneau at Coe Park. They worked on a new public use cabin. They worked on trails all over town. In the end, they contributed over 40,000 hours of labor to parks and trails on public lands here in Juneau, which is multiple years worth of work for what our crews normally would be able to do. We we worked really hard to try to make sure that the program focused not only on the work that was getting done, but also on job skills training and workforce development. That was a criteria we felt was important to maintain eligibility for how the funds were being spent, the criteria that we got from the U.S. Treasury Department. So about 20% of the hours that the crews devoted to working over the summer were spent on different kinds of training opportunities. They got OSHA 10-hour training, they did first aid, CPR. They also got to do a lot of really neat trainings with our park rangers and some of the local naturalists. Here is a picture of one of our lead park ranger, Dale, on the right, working with one of our crew leaders from the CCC on the left. One of my favorite stories is that they really made possible the construction of Juneau's newest public use cabin. Public use cabins on Forest Service land in state parks throughout the state are tremendously popular. So Juneau, the city and borough of Juneau got into this field last year. We worked with the Rasmussen Foundation and the Juneau Park Foundation to raise funds, and we were all ready to build this cabin this year, and then COVID hit, and we had no idea how we were going to do it. So the COVID conservation crew to the rescue, they spent hundreds of hours working on the cabin site and made it happen. Which is a neat story because a lot of the cabins on the Tongass National Forest, the more historic cabins, were actually built by the CCC back in the 30s. So it's kind of a neat corollary to the modern day. And that's our completed cabin. We worked with Richard Carsonson. He's the local naturalist. He provided some interpretive opportunities and did some training with the crews out in the field, talking about invasive weeds and the natural history of Southeast Alaska. And it was just, it was a really tremendous success. Just some nuts and bolts figures. The pay for the positions were matched to what the city pays for park maintenance workers. So it was $19.72 an hour for workers, and supervisors were about $22.50 an hour. We also brought Mike Shields, who some of you might know in the trail industry in Alaska. Mike is a legend, worked for the National Park Service and led trail crews all over the state. He came in and provided training to the crews, the CCC crews employed by Parks and Rec, Eagle Crest, and Trail Mix on rigging and trail construction, which has had paid huge dividends going forward. We have a lot of people who have a lot of very highly desirable training now that we otherwise really probably couldn't have afforded to do. All right, so that's pretty much all my fancy photos. Just real quick, again, to wrap up what some of the key outcomes here for this program were, it really made a difference for these folks. We keep hearing again and again what a difference it made in their lives, their ability to pay rent, their ability to stay in town. And we have seen a lot of these folks move from tourism sector jobs are now looking to go to work in natural resources jobs, which we're really excited about. We kind of generated a pool of workers for us going in the future. Another key outcome of this is that we got a tremendous bang for the buck. When you think about $1 million in government project terms, $1 million doesn't always go very far. But we got so much work done from this program this year here in town, and we hear about it from the community all the time. The trails have never looked better. We have a new cabin. There's a new bridge. It really made a huge difference and people see it. And last, I think it's a good example of how local government and private sector partners like nonprofit organizations such as Trail Mix can really pivot, and they're very nimble. And so they can take a program like this and get it on the ground and get it working and make it successful without a lot of bureaucratic oversight and challenges. So I'm really pleased with how this worked out, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share it with you all, and happy to answer any questions.
Great. Well, thank you, George. I had no idea it was as many as 60 people. That's terrific. And I love that you put gave them some other side benefits, like bringing in the naturalist to talk to them about the area. That's very cool. And I will now turn the floor over to Leah Boltz, who works professionally in our sector, and as a mom, and just as an Alaskan, has other vested interests in our sector as well.
Great, thank you, Lee. It's a great group to be part of today, and I'm hoping to tie into all three of you. George, it was kind of a fun trip down memory lane. I actually am a product of a YCC and a Forest Service program at that. So And today, though, my first hat is that I am a partner and owner in an architectural firm here in Alaska called Bettisworth-North. We're headquartered in Fairbanks and have an office in Anchorage, and we do architecture, landscape architecture, and interior design specifically for the state of Alaska, a lot of it within the public sector and the tourism industry. So I'm going to ask people to get a little bit visionary and a little bit personal now, and to take a second to imagine your very favorite places to travel, your very favorite places to visit and to recreate. And you can even type them into the chat if you feel like it, but hold that memory in your mind of those favorite places for you. Where do you like to go? What makes those places special? For a lot of us, the thing that binds us as Alaskans is that those places are the green spaces, the appreciation of the natural environment, those inspiring and memorable postcard or Instagram moments that you can only get with a natural environment like Alaska's. So, and I like to say that Alaska is the world's largest playground. And that is one of our key differentiators as a state, for sure, as I know you've heard from folks before. And Leah, I love that you talk about this in terms of, recreation is not just a nice to have, but it's a must have. It is critical for so many aspects of our lives. Our role as designers, as architects and landscape architects in that bigger picture of recreation is that we're doing those things that James was talking about. When we look at the demand that's out there for tourism, our industry responds by helping to make those things happen, by helping to put that infrastructure in place, doing the planning and the design to build the facilities like the Mendenhall Glacier visitor centers or the trails, and also to make sure that those assets that we have as a state and as a nation are operating efficiently, that they are protecting our natural environment as well as creating those really special places for people. The interesting thing about that process is that we're on sort of the next step from you, James, that it takes us a couple of years, sometimes, upwards of 5 to 10 years to plan a project and to design it before it can even be fully constructed and realized. And so as we look at this opportunity that we have now to invest in such a great industry and a great part of our economy and our state, that planning takes a long time. It takes a while for us to get ramped up. And you can look at any social media site or talk to any friend out there, and you can feel that pent up demand for tourism right now. People just want to get out and they want to go somewhere. For Alaska, that means they want to come here because we have those open spaces. We have those new cabins where you can go and you can be in your bubble and you can feel safe and be safe. So there's a huge opportunity to invest in those things right now. And we see that opportunity in my industry too. As a business owner, those are the things that we look at so that we can stay here in Alaska. We can keep our folks employed, doing work we love in our favorite state. The other side of that, related specifically to COVID, is Alaska has an opportunity right now to be a leader and an innovator in that space, helping our tourism partners to create safe experiences, healthy places, and those opportunities for our tourists to be safe and to feel safe. And that's going to drive them here. That's also going to help on a global scale to be innovators. So I get super excited about this opportunity that we have as a state. And I'm going to switch hats a little bit and share my screen now. Lee mentioned me as a mom, and so that's perhaps my more important role. I shouldn't say perhaps, it is my more important role. Can you see my screen okay? All right. So as a mom, and Joelle touched on this a little bit too, we formed in Anchorage a grassroots initiative called Parks for All, and it's about inclusive play. So I want you to think back to that favorite place, that favorite recreation experience that you had. and all the things that went along with that. And now think about what would happen if you suddenly lost your sight, or you had an injury and you ended up in a wheelchair, or you're a child like the child on the screen here. You can see this is my daughter Anna, who uses a walker to get around. How does that change that recreation opportunity or that visitor experience that you've had? I'm noticing a little bit of a lag. Is everyone hearing me okay? Okay, great. So that sort of thinking led us in Anchorage to create this initiative called Parks for All. And this little girl was the inspiration. This was actually my daughter Anna on her school playground, unable to get onto the playground. She would come home and tell me stories about how she was made to sit on the sidelines while her friends played because she just couldn't get access to the playground. She couldn't get on. There was nothing for her to play on, which as a parent was really heartbreaking. But the opportunity as an Alaskan and sort of that pioneer spirit was to say, that's not good enough. You know, my child needs to be able to play. Everyone's child should be able to play. And with great partners and a great public-private partnership, we were able to make sure that that didn't happen for my daughter anymore and for others like her. No one anymore is left on the sidelines when it comes to play. And it's not just about my daughter, but 1 in 5 Americans has a disability. Another fact that we like to share is that people with disabilities are the only minority that any one of us can join at any moment, and the largest minority out there. From an opportunity standpoint, the disability community represents hundreds of billions of dollars worth of buying power, spending power. And a lot of our tourists that come up here are either elderly or they experience disabilities. And so there's an economic benefit to serving this population, as well as a social and emotional and just community benefit. As Joelle mentioned, Alaska and Anchorage specifically are pioneering inclusive play. It's very exciting when we are able to do that, when we're able to say we are the global leaders in inclusive play. No other state and no other city has done more of these inclusive play grounds and inclusive play opportunities as we have here in Anchorage. And we want to expand that statewide. We want to make sure that everyone has a place to play and continue that partnership that we've established to make sure that that happens, both for our residents and our tourists. In Anchorage, that means that we've opened our first fully inclusive boundless playground in 2013. It also means that we have 29 other ones that are either done now or in the works. We've created an inclusive play guide to help other communities understand what we're designing for and what inclusion means and how to apply that. And one of my favorite things, which I encourage you, I'll actually type a link here in the chat box for everybody to see this. This is the Municipality of Anchorage State of Play Strategic Plan. The municipality has taken this idea of inclusive play and they have made it a priority. They want to make sure that every child, every community in every region of or every neighborhood in every region of our community has access to play, and that they can be part of that play experience. This is a really detailed plan that is ongoing and just talks about all of the measurements and all of the planning items that go into that, making that strategic plan happen. So I would encourage you to take a look at that as a model and think about how we might adopt that on a larger scale for our state. The ultimate goal is this right here. This is my daughter, who is now able to get onto the playground with her friends. She's no longer sitting on the sidelines, but they are there playing together. And the opportunity for us as a state is to take this differentiator, to take this thing that we are pioneering and really make sure that everyone has access to play and to make ourselves even more of a global leader in this space. I could talk about this all day, but I will turn it over in case anyone has questions, and happy to share more about this inclusive play movement as well.
So thank you,
Lee.
Leah. You've demonstrated, I mean, thank you for sharing your perspectives, but I think you've also demonstrated the power of one person on a mission with commitment can really, I mean, Alaska is now a statewide leader in this, and it's in part to, no small part, thanks to you and the coalition of people you've rallied to get behind this. And, you know, Alaska Outdoor Alliance is all about, you know, strengthening the outdoor recreation sector, but we want to do so with a great deal of intention to be sure that that our outdoor spaces are diverse, equitable, and inclusive for all. And this is a sector that definitely deserves more attention in that space. And that manual that you guys put together is fabulous. I am, if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hands, or yeah, go ahead. Somebody's speaking. Did somebody want to say something? I don't see anybody.
I think that was your echo.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, again, this was our first in a series of really legislative briefings that we're talking about. Outdoor recreation is critical infrastructure, and sessions that we'll be having in successive Wednesdays include a more in-depth discussion about state investment in infrastructure, and as exemplified by the Alaska Long Trail GEO bond as part of that package. And then we'll also have another session talking in more detail about active transportation, and as well as another session on education. We could put more together, but that's what we have lined up so far. I hope you'll tune in and keep us in mind for Wednesdays at noon. Thank you very much to my guest speakers. I appreciate your time and energy and all that you do besides being part of our Zoom session on a daily basis. And we will be, this session is recorded, so we'll be putting links up to that when it's available on YouTube. But thank you so much, and everybody have a great rest of your day.